Please sit down.
And be humble.
Welcome to Humble Podcast. My name is Brittany.
And my name is Manny.
In this episode, we discuss social media and its strange impact on our lives.
You know, Britt, social media is something that has been a part of basically our lives since we were around like 10 or 12. For these kids now, it's been a part of their life since they were born.
10 or 12? What social media were you at?
I told you before, I was on MySpace. I was getting it. I was getting MySpace hoes. You don't know about that? MySpace hoes.
No, I am not familiar with MySpace or MySpace hoes. I was a very late bloomer when it came to everything, including social media. So no.
So when was the first time that you interacted with social media? What was your first experience then? Because mine was when I was 12, and it was MySpace. You know, my sister had one, so I hopped onto it too. Because you know, you gotta ride the wave.
I mean, I wasn't on social media until I was. How old are you in your senior year of high school? 17?
17 or 18, yeah.
Yeah, I was 17. I don't think my first social media like profile picture I think was from my senior year homecoming. So, yeah, senior year um and it was Facebook. I mean, what does a 12-year-old do on social media?
I think I just told you, you get MySpace hoes at 12 years old. I was 12 years old getting it, man. I would do what was a baller back then, I'm a baller now.
Oh my
You know?
God.
But I think that really plays a role into kind of how I evolved into seeing the world through social media and knowing that it was all song and dance, you know? Because back in the MySpace days, you would have this area where people would be making up these personas and putting on these pictures that weren't really them and kind of like role playing. And so from an early age, I got the opportunity to learn that the internet really is just song and dance. So while other people kind of came onto there and took everything wholeheartedly as like truth, I kind of knew for myself what I had seen and knew that everyone was kind of full of crap, if you will. So some of the negative harm was lessened on me. I think that subconsciously those things still affected me, but to a lesser degree, if you will. But what about you? How do you think, what do you think social media, how it's personally like affected you, if you will?
I mean, just like I said earlier, with me starting at such a late age, I didn't even use it. You know, like it wasn't like a necessity for me up until the age that I'm in right now, in my mid-20s. Like I barely use it, and the main role it plays in my life is mainly just as like a distraction. You know, you get the accounts and you scroll, and you're just looking at things online. I try not to let it play a part of my life too much, but I don't really do much on it.
I get that because, you know, even me, I wake up, I find myself scrolling when I wake up, you know, kind of checking out what's going on social media. I don't let it try to play a huge part of my life, but I feel that scrolling all the time like that, taking in those images, it has to affect the way you perceive things. And especially, I think about,
Okay, well, that's fair.
I think about the kids that are growing up in it these days. And you think about how are these kids who are 10, 12, when I was that young, some of them are getting into social media even younger. How are they translating what they're seeing?
Yeah.
Is it making the body images that girls and boys had even worse? If it's making their stereotypes worse?
For
Um,
sure.
we like to believe that we're more progressive, but are we? Are we just like, what direction are we really moving in? Is what I think about when we look at social media. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, you're right. everybody has that instance of when they're scrolling through Instagram and they're seeing all these Instagram models, and you're like, oh man, why don't
Fatty.
I look like that? But then in reality, they don't even look like that. Like,
Them ankles are
it's
crazy.
really the angles. Oh my gosh, I've seen like influencers like posing with literal precision. They're just like, you need to have this hip out at this degree angle. You have to have your chin out at this angle. And it's just like then it creates like this huge illusion, which is why you see so many different influencers like posed in the same positions, because that's what gives you like the quote unquote optimized look and like the most beautiful look. And then they have like a side by side photo of when they're not posing, and you know, they're not sucking in their stomach, and they just look like a regular person instead of like this thing that's been sculpted by clay to get those angles, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like, of course, like, if I was a kid at this age, and if I also was easily influenced by social media, which everybody is these days, or a lot of
Mhm.
people are these days, especially if you have a younger mindset, you're susceptible to what you see. Like, that's literally the thing with children and why people are so scared for children in any aspect: body image, drugs, alcohol, whatever it may be. And so if I was a kid right now, growing up with social media, and I was going through puberty, I would totally be self-conscious about the way that I looked comparative to even people who are younger still look so much older than they actually are. There are people on Instagram who are 14, 15 that look like they're like closer to 21, 23. So if
Yeah.
like I was that age, there I'd be like, why don't I look like these girls who look so much older? It's because of like makeup and whatever else it may be. But you've seen people like that. You know,
Yeah.
there are people out
Yeah.
there who are 14, 15, and they're out here looking like they're in their mid 20s. I don't even look like I'm in my mid 20s. I was told the other day somebody came to my house and asked me if my parents were home.
Oh
So
my god. Oh my god. Out of control. Completely
I
out of
was so
control.
offended.
And it's just that thing where these kids are seeing these images and they're not being taught how to cope with these things. That makes me worry because, for
Mhm.
instance, some people would just tell their kids like just stay off social media. Like that's
That doesn't
equivalent
work.
yeah, that's the equivalent of
Yeah.
telling kids just be abstinent. They're gonna
Yeah,
still do it
exactly.
anyway.
They're still gonna do what they wanna do, and the fact that you're telling them not to do something makes them wanna do it even more.
Exactly. Why not just give them the tools to empower themselves and be educated and know how to deal with these things so
Yeah.
that the impact that it has on them isn't so harmful. And that just makes me think about how we were talking about off screen, off of our show. We were talking about kind of how even our friends, are affected by social media. And I've had instances where I have a pretty close friend who's on Instagram all the time and he
Mhm.
sees these things and he's thinking that he's a failure in life because he compares
Mhm.
himself to like people like Dan Blitzerin. You know who Dan Blitzerin is?
No, who's that?
I hope I'm pronouncing his name wrong. I really do. He's just this guy who goes on Instagram and he posts these pictures with girls in his lap and him throwing these crazy parties. And he's always wearing short shorts and a tight V-neck shirt. And he's either blowing stuff up, shooting guns, or just throwing crazy parties. And he makes it look like he's living the life. And my friend would see these things and he's like, man, I really want to be that guy. Not knowing that all that stuff about him is pretty fake. The house that he has, the mansion he has is rented. And the business that he uses to pretty much fund his activities is not even pulling a
Mhm.
profit. But if you
Mhm.
look at Instagram, it will make it seem like he's living this life and it make my friend feel like he's a failure. And then that social media also made him feel like it just kind of fed into his insecurities because that social media can be a sound box
Mhm.
And whatever you go looking for in that sound box, it starts resonating against itself. So that voice gets louder and louder and louder. So,
Mhm.
in terms of raising awareness, this can be a good thing because you think about things like Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, George Floyd.
Mhm.
It can allow more people to hear about it, get that sound bites of like woke black people together to do something about it. But I think,
Yeah.
as you said one time, it can also be very desensitizing, right?
Yeah, of course. A lot of people, I think, can get desensitized to the news. That's why
Mhm.
even if you were to just put on CNN and see like another armed robbery or whatever the case may be, you think, oh, poor that person, but you don't really let it sink into you. Like this is like a traumatic event that has happened to someone that you may know or like a neighbor or close to your neighborhood, whatever it may be. You just think, oh man, another one of these cases. And then when you see all of these stories, because everybody posts their story on social media these days, like nobody is not posting their story. Like a lot of people post their stories.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, like a lot of people, I think, just scroll past them. They might see the small little headline and see that it says missing or a popular name in the news and then just keep on going. People get desensitized to things so easily. That's why people are able to watch gory television shows for as long as they do, because now it doesn't bother them, just like tragic events in real life don't really bother them. Think of COVID. People are getting desensitized to COVID these days because they're like, oh, well, just another COVID case.
They said it's not about protecting you, it's about compliance in terms of wearing the mask, which
Yeah.
I think is absurd. Please wear a mask. Please keep each
Yes.
other
Please,
safe,
please keep
you
everybody
know?
safe. Don't just think of yourself just because you might be young and not immunocompromised. The next person you interact with might be older and possibly immunocompromised. So, be safe.
Exactly. And there are real government conspiracies because now what people are doing is they're pushing this, oh, like, this is a government funded thing for population control or whatever.
Oh
It
my
makes
god,
me
I've
wonder,
heard so many
but
conspiracies.
these are the same people who won't talk about the fact of the experiments,
Experiments. Yeah.
right? Or the one that
Mhm.
happened in Baltimore, where they took the lady's cells. Do you remember which
Oh,
one that
yes,
was?
I remember that. There was a talk that I had gone to in college, and I
Yeah,
wanna say that you were there too,
I think I was. And it was about
and
that.
yeah, there was a whole case, and these people took her baby's
John
stem
Hopkins.
cells
Don't
or
say these
something.
people. John Hopkins
Oh, I didn't even
Hospital.
remember the school. Okay, Johns Hopkins. I think it was like her stem cells or something. I don't remember the exact thing that happened, but the family tried to sue for the woman's DNA and they wouldn't give it back or something. Was that the case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly. So not only did they take her DNA, but they wouldn't compensate the
The
family
family, yeah.
for
Mhm.
taking DNA, which was a huge thing.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about the fact that minorities or POCs, is it like POCs aren't
Mhm.
trusting of the government, it's not coming from nowhere. It's from a historical standpoint of the systematic racism, and also things the CIA injecting crack into the black community during the Ronald Reagan era that is
Yeah.
documented and we don't talk about,
It
and that
is
yet
true.
yet the conspiracy theory people want to focus on is
Mhm.
COVID with mask. They are
Yeah.
actual issues, and that's what you choose to focus on. That drives me
Yeah.
crazy. Like,
And
I can't. It's just so frustrating.
yeah.
Um, and but going back to what we were talking about too, about being desensitized, I think that plays a part in the communication aspect, right? When it
Yeah.
comes to social
It
media,
totally does. Mhm.
right? Have you ever tried to really communicate with someone?
Over social media?
Yeah.
And try to, like, connect with them?
Try to connect with them, try to really see what's going on with them, have some type of conversation. It always ends up feeling very shallow, right?
I have only ever probably talked to like a couple people over Snapchat.
Mhm.
And why Snapchat was like the way we communicated was because, you see people posting and then you're like, oh, hey, I haven't spoken to you in a while. Like, how have you been? And I've had conversations that start like that over Snapchat. And then by a few lines in, a few messages back and forth in, we decide to like, let's move over to like text message or let me like call you, you know?
Mhm. Or
So
mhm.
I mean, I can't really say that it's shallow, but if I'm talking to a friend,
Mhm.
it's never usually a shallow conversation.
But
It's
when I
still
talk
I'm still connecting with them.
but, you know, when I'm talking about shallow, I'm talking about water fountain conversation, how's the weather, how's the wife and kids, like, things that aren't really touching base with the actual person and going into the actual person. For instance, I know that we talk fairly regularly, and we
Yeah.
can both say that there are conversations that if we didn't talk regularly,
Mhm.
we wouldn't know what's going on in each other's life. Social media doesn't really allow for intimacy, you know?
You know, there have been people who tell me that they can easily connect with people over the internet, and I've had this conversation with you before, like how you continue a conversation on just an internet platform or just a texting platform alone. Um, but some people find a way, so I can't really say that that's 100% the case. But as a person who appreciates personal conversation face to face or face to face conversation, and at least if I can hear your voice instead of just reading a text message and interpreting tone, it would be easy because you're the same way. It would be easy for
Mhm,
us to say that conversation like that is probably shallow.
mhm,
But for the person who's growing up right now, or, even a few years younger than us who
mhm.
really grew up with the internet and like social media, that text messaging is like, or just communication over social media is like their way of communicating. Like, oh, why are you calling me? This is disgusting. I'm reevaluating our friendship type of people. You know what I mean? Like there are people that'll like that.
And I get that, but I think when you take away the gestures, the body
Mhm.
language,
Yeah.
tone, it
Yeah.
strips language, it strips how we speak to one another from the key
No, I
things
completely agree
that
with
we
you.
need. And
Mhm.
so when I talk about intimacy, how do you can definitely do it. I just think it's rare, you know?
I think it would be interesting to find somebody or have somebody else who solely speaks to people like through social media and through text message, and who hates phone calls, like on this episode, to see how they actually maintain relationships. Because after a while, if I'm texting you back and forth, like if we're speed texting, as I'm typing you're typing type of thing, I'm gonna be like, let me just call you because we could do this so much easier over the phone. But some people, like the person who decides that no, that's not for me, I want to hear what they say and hear what like they think texting is like for them and like what their experience has been like.
I think that would
You
be
know?
interesting because I can't
Yeah.
really
Because we
imagine
both have the same mindset when it comes to it.
maintaining a relationship in that way and
Hmm.
like the
Like I
depth
could never.
the depth of the relationship, really, the
Hmm.
intimacy, two
Exactly.
people really connecting with one another. I
Hmm.
think that would be difficult to do, and I wonder if they do actually feel as though they know those people they're talking to, people they met on their internet, and
Hmm.
forming a relationship with them and having a long distance relationship that way. So I understand there are cases where people have long distance relationships and
Hmm.
talk to that person every single day and feel like they're as close as can be with them. But I
Hmm.
wonder if that's an exception to the rule. You know what I mean?
Dating apps, that's a form of social media, right?
Mhm.
And people quote unquote connect on dating apps, and the only way you really start connecting with people is by messaging them on those apps.
But you could also make the
So
argument that when you see those people in real life, sometimes what you thought was a connection ends up not being anything there at all. Once you see them face to
That's
face and see
very
their
true.
gestures,
That's
you
very
know?
true, and you get a feel for the actual person.
Mhm.
So, cause you're right, like people that you imagine through a screen,
Mhm.
and you imagine the way that they will talk and you imagine the way that they'll sound and you even imagine the way that they look because again, on social media you're putting your best face forward.
Mhm.
So all the pictures you put on whatever platform you're using to meet people is going to be, your best photos out there. So you imagine how they'll look when they talk, the way they walk. And if everything isn't like up to what you imagine, maybe that connection isn't going to actually be there. So you're right. But
Yeah, I just wonder if those things live up to par. I wonder what it means for us as people as we move
mhm,
forward.
mhm,
Will our relationships with one another get worse because we think we're more connected than ever, or will they get better? But especially when you can see a person at their breaking point, if you don't really talk with that person, you're not gonna message them, and really all you're doing is giving yourself secondhand trauma and no
mhm,
means to process that. When you see things on social media that are traumatic, that a person is going through, and you don't talk to them, like you're not the type of person, or you're not in a relationship with that person where you would message them, but you see they're going through this traumatic thing. What are you gaining from being following them for being their friend on whatever, other than trauma, other than secondhand trauma? Are you going to empathize better with people because of it? I wonder what your connection to that is. I wonder how you process that.
mhm.
How you take that information in and what you do with it. What do you do with information like that?
I mean, if I saw somebody on social media that I didn't talk to on a regular basis, and a regular basis doesn't need to be every day or once a week or even once a month. It can be like, a check-in
Annually,
every couple months. Like no,
quarterly, annually.
that's a so-so relationship, but like regularly, like once every 2-3 months,
Hmm.
and like you have like a nice lunch, a
Hmm.
nice like sit down check-in type thing. So if it's not a person that I'm not like speaking to regularly or an active person in my life or I'm not an active person in their life and I see that they're struggling with something, um sometimes I feel like it's not my place because at the end of the day if you're struggling with something, everybody's going to be telling you, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm here for you." And while those words are nice to hear, as a person or as people who go through hard times, like that it's not always genuine because it's just like, well, you haven't been in my life like as a present person in my life. Yes, you're offering me this help, but it's more of a passing, oh, if you need anything, let me know.
Or the
And you
thoughts and prayers, right?
exactly, or the thoughts and prayers, and it's just like, but at the end of the day, I'm sure 30 minutes or an hour later after you've messaged me that on whatever social media you've messaged me on, you might have forgotten about it, you
Yeah.
know?
And then
So,
you think about that and what it's kinda doing to our empathy, right? Because 'Cause you're thinking
mhm,
about before how these things we're seeing on social media is desensitizing us even though they're important to see, but we're
mhm,
honestly desensitized from hearing, like, another person of color has died in the streets for no reason. Or,
mhm,
you see these horrible things happening to people and you, like, detach yourself and remove
mhm,
yourself from the situation. Are
mhm.
we losing our empathy, I wonder, you know?
I can't say that we're losing our empathy, because obviously there are thousands and millions of people who have made strides to make sure that these people's stories are heard. If people weren't
Mhm,
didn't have any empathy, we wouldn't have had all those marches. We wouldn't have had all those protests. We wouldn't have
mhm.
had all those people making signs, donating money, making petitions. Trying to create real change. So I think that if people weren't didn't empathize with one another, none of that would happen. So I think deep down, people are still the people that we cherish, and we still have all of those qualities that make us who we are. You know, people, things with feelings. We're not like, robots just yet. So I think we still have empathy as people, but for the people that don't really care, I can't say care, but for people who um just are desensitized to the same type of story over and over again, that maybe they just haven't heard the story that'll make them want to make the change.
So pretty much the story that will finally resonate with them, if you will.
Because sometimes people don't really understand the nature of an action or understand how serious something is until it happens to someone that they know or to
Mhm,
themselves.
mhm.
And so
But
I
should you
really
have
think
to
that's what
have
it is.
but should you really have to have something like that to happen to be able to empathize with another human being?
No, you shouldn't, but some people aren't as empathetic as others. Some people don't feel as deeply as others. And so you have to take that into consideration. Everybody's chemistry is different.
But it's still a human being, and I think that's the same argument people make when you start to talk about women's rights, and people have to tell, like, women have to tell men, like, think of your mother, your sister, your aunt, your wife, or whatever, to make them
Yeah.
empathize with a human being. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, you shouldn't have to go through that. You should
You
be able to
shouldn't.
just see this person as another human being that demands your respect, and that just demands your respect. And I
Yeah.
think I'm just not really sure. I think desensitization desensitization can have some negative effect on our empathy. I would like to see going forward how we deal with things. I think social media has been really
Mhm.
good about holding people responsible. I think
Holding people accountable.
responsible, yeah, accountable. As far as like, cancel culture has gotten toxic. It's gotten bad.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. But the fact that now
Oh my
it's
god.
awful. They cancel you over anything. But the fact that now people are being held accountable for their actions to some degree, people who otherwise would have gotten away scot free, at least
Mhm.
there's this vigilante justice of the internet coming after them. So that is
Yeah.
to me, that is a really good thing. I
Yeah.
think
I
it's gotten
agree.
a little bit out of control. We need to reel it back in. I'm proud of y'all, but y'all do it too much. It's just like that Hotep page. Uh, Dr. Umar, shout out to my plug, Dr. Umar, no context. I gotta link that. Uh, but you think about those type of things, and it makes me very curious to see, especially
Mhm.
when I talk to younger generations, my cousins, um, kind of what their perspective on everything is, and it kind of gives me hope, but it kind of makes me scared too for what's next for us. And think about the MySpace hoes.
Those MySpace hoes. You're
Think
right.
about the
You're right.
MySpace hoes. And speaking of MySpace hoes, we just want to thank you all for listening to Humble Podcast. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcast Humble. Yes, you heard that, Podcast Humble. Why is it reversed? Well, it's because Instagram and Twitter decided that our username should be taken, and so we had to reverse it. Inverse it? Is it reverse it? Inverse it? Which one would you say?
Uh, Inverse. I would say
Inverse.
inverse. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so follow us on Twitter. So follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcast Humble, where you can
Podcast humble.
Podcast Humble. We said it like 6 times. Y'all should go check out our Twitter and Instagram if you can't tell. Where you can share your thoughts, reactions, and experiences on this topic. We would love to hear from our listeners. You can also email us at humblepodcast@protonmail.com. And if we actually start getting mail like that, we can discuss what you think about what the subjects, or if you have any questions for us on the subject. Thank you
Thank
for
you for
listening.
listening to Humble Podcast.
You did the whole thing.